The call came at 7:43 a.m., just as I was pouring milk into my coffee. "Mrs. Alvarez," the woman said, her voice polite but edged with confusion. "I just need to confirm. Are you requesting an extension on the personal loan with Brightline Bank?" I remember staring at the phone, blinking hard. "I don't have a loan," I said. "I've never even heard of Brightline." There was a pause, the kind that freezes the room. "Well," she said softly, "then someone has been very busy in your name." The milk overflowed onto the counter. I didn't clean it up. It took an hour for the shock to settle, and by then I had my laptop open, scrolling through the credit bureau site. 3 loans. 2 credit cards. All approved within the past year. All with my address. All with my signature, or something close to it. I sat back in my chair, pulse thrumming in my ears. There was only one person who had access to those documents. One person who had borrowed my laptop, my mail, my trust. My son. The word lodged in my throat like a stone. Daniel. My oldest. The one who stayed after his divorce, who promised to get back on his feet. I remember saying yes when he asked to use my mailing address for a job application. Yes when he asked to borrow my spare credit card just for gas. Yes when he asked me to co-sign the first car. Now the yeses looked like evidence. I printed everything out and laid the pages across the table. The names blurred as I stared at them, a mother's handwriting copied by her son. My credit score was down 200 points. My name, the name I guarded like a home, had been sold line by line to a bank that didn't even know me. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about calling him right then. But I knew if I did, he'd charm his way out of it. He always had that easy voice, the one that made his teachers adore him, the one that used to melt my resolve when he was small. Instead, I called the bank back and asked for copies of the application forms. They sent them the next morning. Every signature looked like mine. Every line of information was exact, except the phone number. His phone number. When he came home that evening, I was sitting at the table with the papers spread out like a crime scene. He glanced at them, then at me. "What's all this?" "Loans," I said quietly. "In my name." He froze for a moment, then smiled, small and nervous. "Mom, it's not what you think." I waited. He didn't continue. He just kept smiling, like that alone could erase the ink. I had no words for the betrayal yet, only silence. The kind that fills the air before something breaks. I used to think motherhood meant saving your child, no matter what. But that morning, watching him lie to my face, I started to wonder. Who saves the mother? The realization was slow but steady, like a tide rising around my feet. Tomorrow, I would check every account. Tonight, I would sit in the quiet and let the truth breathe. Because once it entered the air, there was no taking it back. And by morning, I would no longer be the same woman who said yes. The next day, I drove to the local branch in town, the one where Daniel used to work part-time in college. The woman at the desk looked at me kindly as I slid a folder across the counter. "These loans," I said, "are in my name, but I didn't open them." She clicked her pen twice before answering. "That's serious," she said. "You'll need to file a fraud claim." Her voice softened. "Did someone close to you have access to your ID?" I hesitated. "How do you say my son without choking on it?" "Yes," I whispered finally. "My son lives with me." Something in her expression shifted, sympathy mixed with pity. It's the look they give you when they realize this isn't about money. It's about betrayal, disguised in a family photo. By noon, the paperwork was filed. Fraud case number 317B. She said they'd investigate and call in a few weeks. When I walked back to the car, the sunlight hurt my eyes. It was one of those winter days where everything looks sharp, too honest. At home, Daniel was on the couch scrolling through his phone. "Hey," he said. "You look tired." I stood by the doorway. I went to the bank. He froze. Oh. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. I know you used my name, Daniel. The words felt strange leaving my mouth, like they didn't belong to the language of mothers and sons. He rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, I was gonna tell you. Things got tight after the layoff. You forged my signature. It's not forged, Mom. I had to use your credit to get the loan. I'm paying it back. Are you? I said quietly. Because the bills are coming to me. He sighed. You don't understand. They wouldn't give me approval. It's just temporary. You have good credit. I needed time. Time. That word again. The same one he used when his marriage fell apart, when his car broke down, when he said he'd move out. Always time. Always mine to give. You stole my name, I said. He looked up, eyes wide, defensive. I didn't steal it, I'm your son. I felt something break, not loud, just a small clean tear somewhere deep inside. The kind that doesn't heal in a day. Being my son doesn't mean you get to own me. He scoffed, stood up. You're overreacting. I said I'll fix it. But I could tell, from the way his eyes darted, from the way his voice trembled. He didn't believe his own promise anymore. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. Not because I thought he'd hurt me. Because I needed to feel that something, anything, in this house was still mine. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about every time I'd said, of course, don't worry, I'll help you this once. Every time I'd chosen peace over truth. Every time love made me small. The next morning, I called my friend Mara. She's been through her share. Her daughter once drained her retirement fund. When I told her what happened, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, you have to protect yourself now. Love doesn't cover theft. Her words landed heavy, not cruel, just real. I wrote them down on a yellow notepad and underlined them twice. That afternoon, I closed the joint bank account. Then I called a credit counselor. The woman on the phone said, you're doing the right thing. I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow. Like someone had scraped the trust out of me and left only the outline. Still, I breathed. Slowly. Because sometimes the only power left is in the breath you take when you refuse to scream. And that breath carried me into the next day, the day the bank called again, but this time with news that made everything worse. The second call came 3 days later, just before dinner. Mrs. Alvarez, the voice said, we've completed the initial investigation. The applications for the loans were submitted from your home IP address. I gripped the edge of the counter. My home? Yes, ma'am. Same network, same computer. One of the forms even has a video verification file attached. My heart sank. Video. Yes. We require a short recording for identity verification. Would you like to review it before we escalate the case? I said yes. Of course I did. When the link arrived in my inbox, I stared at it for a long moment. My hands trembled as I clicked play. And there he was. Daniel. My son, sitting at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought for our family dinners. He was wearing my reading glasses, holding my ID, and imitating my voice. This is Maria Alvarez, he said, smiling at the camera. Yes, I'm applying for a personal loan. He even waved. The video lasted 14 seconds. 14 seconds that rewrote 40 years of motherhood. I sat perfectly still. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just watched once, twice, again, until disbelief turned to understanding, and understanding turned to something colder. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't stumbled. He'd planned it. That night, I unplugged the Wi-Fi and shut the laptop. I made myself tea and sat by the window as the street lights blinked on. I thought of the small things, how he used to draw hearts on Mother's Day cards, how he used to call me his safe place. And now my name, my identity had become his hiding place. I slept a few hours, but when I woke, I felt different. Calmer, clearer, stripped of illusion. I went into the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror. There were new lines I hadn't seen before, quiet proof of endurance. I whispered, "No more." Then I did what mothers aren't supposed to do. I called the police. The officer was patient. He took my statement, asked for the video, the documents, the dates. Then he asked gently, "Do you intend to press charges?" My throat tightened. He didn't sound judgmental, just tired, like he'd heard too many stories like mine. "Yes," I said. The word came out steadier than I expected. When I hung up, the silence was heavier than before, but it wasn't hopeless. It was clean. That afternoon, Daniel came home early. He noticed the router unplugged, the mail stacked neatly in a pile, my notebook open with lists and dates. "What's going on?" he asked. "I called the bank," I said. "And the police." His face went pale. You called the cops on me." "I called them for me," I said quietly. "There's a difference." He started pacing, hands in his hair. "Mom, you don't understand what this will do. You'll ruin my life." I met his eyes. "You already used mine." He froze. For the first time, he didn't have a reply. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just told him the truth. "You can stay here tonight. But tomorrow I want you gone." He left without dinner. And for the first time in years, I locked the door behind him, not out of anger, but to reclaim something sacred, the right to safety. Later, I wrote a note to myself in the same notebook. Love doesn't mean erasing the damage. It means seeing it clearly and refusing to step on the glass again. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, a man in a navy jacket introduced himself. "Mrs. Alvarez? I'm Detective Green. Mind if I come in?" I nodded. It was time to tell everything. And as I began, I realized this wasn't just about stolen money. It was about reclaiming my own name. Detective Green was calm, the kind of calm that comes from hearing too many families break in slow motion. He laid out his notebook and started with the basics. "When did you first notice the irregularities? What access did your son have to your documents? Has there been any prior financial conflict?" Each question sliced open another piece of truth I hadn't wanted to touch. Yes, he had access. Yes, I trusted him completely. No, I never thought he'd use it against me. He nodded, writing in quiet loops, his pen scratching like a small storm. "We'll open a case for identity fraud," he said finally. "But because it's family, it can get complicated. Banks tend to classify this as a domestic dispute unless we push." "Push," I said. He looked up, studied me for a moment, then nodded once. "All right. We'll push." When he left, I stood at the door and realized something strange. I wasn't shaking. There was pain, yes. But under it, a steady pulse of something else. Resolve. Later that evening, I found Daniel's bedroom door half open. His things were mostly gone. Just a few shirts in a pile, and on the dresser, my spare house key, left on a folded receipt. He'd written one word on it. "Sorry." The handwriting looked hurried. But guilt is easy to write when the damage is already done. I sat on his bed, smelled the faint trace of his cologne. And I let myself remember the boy who used to build forts in the living room. The one who'd cry when his goldfish died. I whispered into the air, "I wish it wasn't you." But the truth was louder than my wish. And truth, once spoken, does not return to silence. The next few weeks blurred together. Calls from the bank. Letters from credit bureaus. Paperwork thick as shame. Then came the email that made my stomach drop. Subject, Notice of Legal Counsel Representation, Maria Alvarez. Except it wasn't from me, it was from him. Daniel had hired a lawyer. He was disputing the fraud claim, insisting that I'd given him permission. Attached was a statement, typed formal, cold. She was aware of all applications and consented to the use of her identity for financial purposes. Consent. That word burned. He was building a case against me, his mother. I took the letter to Detective Green. He frowned, reading it twice. This means he's fighting back. But don't worry, we can counter it. You have proof, video, timestamps. We'll need to involve a financial lawyer. I don't know any, I said quietly. He hesitated, then scribbled something on the back of his card. Call this woman Eleanor Weber. She handles elder financial abuse cases. She's good. I stared at the word elder. It stung more than I expected. But I called anyway. Eleanor's voice was steady, low, practical. I've seen this before, Mrs. Alvarez. Sons, daughters, even spouses. You're not alone in this. Something in me cracked. I raised him right, I said. At least, I thought I did. She was silent for a moment. Then softly, sometimes love teaches them they'll always be forgiven. And some learn to use that as a weapon. Her words landed heavy but true. We met the next day. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with a folder already labeled Alvarez versus Alvarez. Seeing my name split in two like that made my stomach twist. Over the next hour, she walked me through affidavits, financial forensics, timelines. Every line on every page was a step toward reclaiming myself. And yet, the closer we got to justice, the lonelier it felt. Because every signature against him was also against the boy I used to love. But I signed anyway. That night I made myself dinner, just soup and bread. No TV, no phone. Just the sound of rain tapping against the window. I breathed, slow, deliberate. Because this was the middle of the storm. And I wasn't drowning this time. The next morning, the lawsuit arrived, and with it, a letter that changed everything again. The letter arrived in a thick white envelope stamped confidential, legal notice. Inside were 2 pages, and a single chilling sentence near the top. Petition for assessment of mental competency, Maria Alvarez. For a moment, the world just stopped. I read it again, slower this time, as if I might find a different meaning between the lines. But it was clear. My son was trying to have me declared legally incompetent, to take control of my finances, my property, my life. I sat at the kitchen table, where everything had started. The air felt heavy, the kind of weight that presses down on your ribs until breathing becomes a decision. This wasn't about loans anymore. This was war. I called Eleanor immediately. She didn't sound surprised. I was afraid of this, she said. It's the next move when they lose control. But don't panic, we'll respond. Her calm steadiness anchored me. By that afternoon, we had filed a counter-petition. By evening, she'd arranged for a psychological evaluation on my terms. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being the caretaker of everyone, now I had to prove I could take care of myself. I met with Dr. Henson, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She asked about my memory, my finances, my emotions. Halfway through, she put her pen down and looked at me carefully. You're remarkably lucid, Mrs. Alvarez, she said. Do you know why your son would claim otherwise? I smiled faintly. Because he needs me to be broken, so he can stay whole. She nodded. I'll write my report tonight. When I left her office, I sat in the car and cried for the first time since this all began. Not because I was scared, but because the truth had finally found its voice. Over the next few weeks, the case built itself piece by piece. Eleanor worked quietly but fiercely. We traced transactions, pulled digital footprints, gathered the video evidence. Every fact became a small act of self-respect. One night she called me. Maria, The hearing is scheduled for the 18th. We'll win this, but I want you prepared. He might show up. I thanked her and hung up. Then I walked through my home, each room like a museum of shared years. Photos, notes, memories. But instead of grief, I felt clarity. The walls were still mine. The light that fell across the dining table was still mine. My peace was still mine. I went to my bedroom, opened my jewelry box, and found a small gold ring Daniel had given me when he was 12. He'd saved for weeks to buy it. It used to symbolize love. Now it symbolized history and choice. I put it away in a small envelope labeled past. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. And when I woke, I realized something. I no longer felt like a victim waiting to be rescued. I felt like a woman finally coming home to herself. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray and quiet. No thunder, no rain, just stillness. Eleanor met me outside the courthouse, her file thick, her expression firm. "Whatever happens today," she said, "you've already won." You stood up. I nodded, feeling the truth of it. Inside, the courtroom buzzed softly with whispers. And there he was, my son, sitting at the opposite table, his lawyer beside him. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders tight, his eyes darting toward me and away again. I took my seat. Eleanor leaned close. "Let him speak first," she whispered. "Silence is your power now." And I did. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to defend or explain. I let him talk. Every excuse, every plea. And I sat in stillness, my breath steady. When it was finally my turn, I spoke softly. I raised my son with everything I had. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. The courtroom fell silent. Even his lawyer looked down. Eleanor squeezed my hand under the table. That moment wasn't revenge. It was release. I realized then that liberation doesn't always come from winning. Sometimes it comes from being unafraid to lose what you should have never had to keep. The judge hadn't even ruled yet, but deep down I already knew. The outcome wouldn't define me anymore. What came next would. The ruling came 1 week later. I was at home when Eleanor called. Her voice was calm, almost reverent. "It's over, Maria," she said. The judge dismissed his petition. "You're cleared of all allegations, and the fraud charges against your son are moving forward." For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just looked out the window at the slow drift of clouds over the neighbor's maple tree. The world looked the same, but something inside me had shifted forever. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired in a clean, peaceful way, the kind that follows a long cry or a deep confession. "I thought I'd feel victorious," I said softly. Eleanor chuckled. "No one feels victorious in cases like this. Just lighter. Lighter." Yes, that was the word. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table again. The same table where I'd discovered everything. The same table where he'd once done his homework, where I'd placed birthday cakes and bills and broken truths. I spread out the last of the paperwork, signed the final forms, and slid them into a manila envelope. Each signature was a small funeral for the life I'd been trying to keep alive. When I was done, I poured a cup of tea and let the quiet fill the room. That's when it happened. A strange calmness settled in like a soft blanket. I thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses, but the kind that frees. Because holding on to anger had started to feel like holding my breath underwater, and for the first time in years, I wanted to come up for air. I whispered, "I forgive you." Not to erase him. Not to invite him back. Just to release the story from my body. The next day, I called the bank one last time. They confirmed the accounts were closed, the fraud alert finalized, my credit repair underway. The woman on the line said, "You've handled this with a lot of grace, Mrs. Alvarez." I smiled faintly. Grace wasn't the goal. Survival was. That night, Mara came over with dinner, roasted vegetables and bread. We ate in the living room, candles flickering. Halfway through, she reached for my hand. "You did it," she said. "I did what?" "You stopped the cycle." Her words hit deep. Stop the cycle. Of silence, of enabling, of inherited wounds. I thought of my mother, who'd once said, "Family means we forgive before we understand." Maybe she was half right. Family means we love, but sometimes from a distance. Later, when Mara left, I walked out to the small garden behind the house. The night was cool, the soil damp from last week's rain. I knelt and pressed my fingers into the earth, a quiet grounding. For years, I'd buried myself under other people's needs. Now, I was planting something new. Boundaries, honesty, a life that belonged to me again. The porch light glowed warm behind me. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its low hum a reminder that time moves forward, whether we're ready or not. I whispered to the night, "I'm still here." The wind rustled through the leaves like an answer. And for the first time since that first phone call, I believed it. Because healing, I realized, isn't the return of what was lost, it's the quiet acceptance that you can still bloom without it. And tomorrow, I would learn what blooming looked like when no one was watching. It's been 11 months since that morning call. The debt is cleared. The case is closed. And my house, my name, are my own again. But the quiet feels different now. Not lonely. Just honest. Daniel hasn't called. Not once. At first, I checked my phone every morning. Then, every week. Now, I keep it on silent. Some silences deserve to stay whole. I still think of him sometimes, the boy, not the man. The one who used to fall asleep in the back seat after soccer practice, his face pressed against the window, his hand curled around mine. There's a kind of grief that isn't loud. It just hums quietly under the ribs, like a soft ache that never entirely leaves. But I've made peace with that. On Sundays, I walk to the market. The woman at the fruit stall always asks how I'm doing. Better, I say. Because it's true. I started taking a pottery class. At first, I couldn't get the clay to hold its shape. It kept collapsing in my hands. But the instructor said something that stayed with me. Clay remembers pressure, but it also remembers release. I think people are the same. Sometimes, when I'm shaping a bowl, one imagine all the years I bent myself to fit someone else's needs. And now, with every turn of the wheel, I let go a little more. The house feels different too. I changed the locks, painted the walls, gave away the old couch, the one Daniel always sprawled across like a throne. In its place, a small reading chair, a lamp, and a view of the rain against the glass. I've learned to enjoy small rituals. Morning tea in silence. Mail unopened until after breakfast. My name, written in my own hand on bills that only belong to me. The simplest things can become sacred once you've almost lost them. Last week, Detective Green stopped by the market. He smiled when he saw me. "You look good, Mrs. Alvarez," he said. "I feel good," I replied. Different kind of good. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else. He nodded, the kind of nod that says, "I know exactly what you mean." Sometimes I still wonder if Daniel will ever understand what he did, not just to my credit, but to my heart. But that's no longer my work to do. My work now is healing, creating, living without flinching. There's a small plum tree in my yard. I planted it months ago, a fragile thing that barely stood upright in the wind. I almost pulled it out once, thinking it wouldn't make it through the season. But I left it. And now, tiny fruits are beginning to form, pale and new. Every morning, I check them. Every morning, I smile. Because this quiet regrowth, is what survival looks like. And sometimes I whisper, just to hear it out loud. I am still the woman who raised him. But I am no longer the woman who will be used. The rain begins again, soft against the window. I let it fall. No resistance. No fear. For the first time in years, I feel at peace, not because everything is fixed, but because I finally stopped trying to fix everything. And as the kettle whistles in the kitchen, I close my eyes and breathe in the sound. Slow, steady, grateful. Because healing doesn't end with forgiveness. It ends with freedom. And freedom, I've learned, often sounds just like this: the quiet sigh of a woman exhaling at last in her own home.